He was mopping the courthouse floor when he leaned close and whispered 6 words that changed everything. "You're in danger. Pretend I'm your wife." No one noticed the janitor. No one noticed the fear in my hands. But every second after that whisper would expose a truth powerful enough to break a conspiracy and heal 2 broken lives forever. The courthouse smelled like old paper and disinfectant, a place where stories ended and lives were stamped with decisions that echoed forever. I stood alone near the vending machines, clutching a folder that felt heavier than it should have. Inside were documents I barely understood and a summons I had tried to ignore until ignorance was no longer an option. I was early, too early, and the quiet made my thoughts louder. That was when I noticed him. A janitor, middle-aged, broad-shouldered but tired, pushing a mop bucket that squeaked with every step. His uniform was faded, his boots scuffed, his posture careful, like someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. He looked invisible, the way people like me often did when the world decided we didn't matter. As he passed, he froze. For a brief second our eyes met, and something in his face changed, sharp, alert, afraid in a controlled way. He moved closer, slow and deliberate, pretending to adjust a caution sign near my feet. His voice was barely a breath. "You're in danger," he whispered. "Pretend I'm your wife." I blinked, confused. My heart stuttered. Before I could ask anything, his hand gently closed around mine. Not possessive, not forceful, just steady. He leaned in as if whispering a familiar joke and raised his voice just enough to sound casual. "Come on, honey. Court's about to start." I should have pulled away. I should have screamed. Instead, instinct took over. I nodded and let him guide me down the hallway, my pulse roaring in my ears. Behind us, I felt eyes. Heavy ones. We turned a corner, and he released my hand immediately, stepping back as if he'd just realized he'd crossed a line. "My name's Daniel," he said quietly. "I clean this floor every night. And someone's been watching you since you walked in." My breath caught. Why would anyone? "Because of that folder," he interrupted, nodding to what I was holding. "And because you don't know what you're carrying." We slipped into an empty courtroom, the kind used for overflow hearings. The lights buzzed faintly above us. Daniel checked the hallway before closing the door most of the way. "They think you're alone," he said. "And they think you're easy to scare." I laughed, short and brittle. "I am alone. And I am easy to scare." "No," he said softly. "You're brave. You showed up." That was the first kindness I'd heard in a long time. I was a single mother trying to fight a predatory landlord who had forged eviction notices and bullied tenants into silence. I didn't know that the evidence I had accidentally tied him to a larger fraud ring that laundered money through shell properties. I only knew that people had started calling my phone at night and hanging up when I answered. Daniel listened without interrupting. When I finished, he rubbed his jaw and sighed. "I thought so." "You thought so?" I asked. He nodded. "I was a cop once. Before my wife died. Before I became this." He gestured to his uniform, not with shame, but with acceptance. I keep my head down, but I still see patterns. Footsteps echoed in the hall. Male voices. Laughing, but forced. Daniel's eyes hardened. "They followed you. What do we do?" My voice shook. He met my gaze, steady as a wall. "We let them think you're not alone anymore." For the rest of the morning, we played our roles. He walked beside me, spoke to clerks like we were married, sat just close enough to make it convincing. And every time fear rose, he grounded me with a quiet word, a reassuring look. I didn't know when pretending turned into trust, but by the time my name was called, I realized I didn't want him to leave my side. What I didn't know was that this was only the beginning, and that the danger was far greater than either of us had imagined. The courtroom doors closed behind us with a thud that felt final. The judge adjusted her glasses. The landlord's attorney stood smug and confident. And then I saw him, the landlord himself, leaning back in his chair, eyes sharp, scanning the room like a predator. His gaze landed on Daniel. The color drained from his face. "Detective Hale," the man said aloud, too loud, too casual. "Didn't expect to see you here." A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel didn't move. He didn't correct him. He simply placed a hand on my shoulder and squeezed. "I go by Daniel now," he said evenly. "And I'm here to support my wife." The lie hung in the air, fragile and bold. The landlord smirked. Of course you are. That was when I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. The hearing unraveled fast. Documents were challenged. Dates didn't line up. Daniel, still technically a civilian, quietly passed notes to my attorney, questions to ask, inconsistencies to highlight. The judge's expression changed, curiosity replacing impatience. Then the landlord's attorney objected too aggressively. Then again, and again, the judge called a recess. In the hallway, tension snapped. The landlord hissed threats under his breath. Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. Back away from her. You don't scare me anymore, the man sneered. You lost your badge. Daniel leaned in just enough for only him to hear. I didn't lose my integrity. Security intervened. The judge returned. And when the hearing resumed, something shifted. The truth, long buried, began to surface. By the end of the day, the case was postponed, this time with an order for a criminal investigation. Outside, my legs gave out. I sat on the courthouse steps and cried, not just from relief, but from exhaustion. Daniel sat beside me, silent, present. I don't even know how to thank you, I whispered. He stared ahead, eyes distant. You already did. You reminded me who I used to be. We met again the next day, and the day after that. We stopped pretending. We talked about his daughter, about my son, about loss and second chances. The investigation widened. Arrests followed. The danger faded. One evening, months later, as we watched our kids play in the park, he laughed softly. You know, he said. I whispered that line to save a stranger. I smiled, tears welling. And you ended up saving a family. He took my hand, not as a lie, not as a shield, but as a promise. Because sometimes, the person who looks invisible is the one who sees everything. And sometimes, pretending to belong is the first step toward finally coming home. Courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Love doesn't always announce itself. And the smallest whisper, spoken at the right moment, can change the course of two lives forever.